There are a number of premises that have been held by idiots at the State Department, our elites at the State Department, that are just incredibly wrong, and Putin proved a bunch of them wrong over the course of the last week. Number one, the idea that economic sanctions deter major military powers from doing anything is wrong, and it has been wrong for a very, very long time. In fact, there's a good new book out titled The Economic Weapon by a professor at Yale University, Nicholas Mulder. And that book is about a history of economic warfare and the use of economic sanctions to try and deter major forces from engaging in warfare. And of course, it has never worked. We've tried economic sanctions against Japan. It didn't work. We tried economic sanctions against Italy when they invaded Ethiopia. It didn't work. We tried economic sanctions against Hitler. It did not work. Over and over again, we have tried economic sanctions on major powers. And the real fact of the matter is that economic sanctions on major powers are ineffective because those major powers usually are able to avoid those economic sanctions by finding other people to ally with them or align with them. If there are big financial or commercial loopholes, then it makes it nearly impossible for sanctions to have any long-term impact. And again, alliances allow you to skirt all of that, which is exactly what Russia has known. So economic sanctions were bound to be a failure here, particularly the sort of economic sanctions that we were laying for Russia, as we'll talk about in just one moment. But that's not the only idiotic foreign policy idea that was shattered by Vladimir Putin's aggression. Another idiotic foreign policy idea is that just because you're a second-rate economic power, that means that you are not going to be aggressive. That's always been foolish. In fact, it turns out that countries that are second-rate economic powers have routinely been extraordinarily aggressive on their borders. The reason being, when you are weak internally, this means that you tend to be more aggressive externally in order to lock down your own population and give them some sort of common purpose. So everyone was suggesting that because Russia has a very weak economy, again, Russia's total national GDP is approximately the size of the GDP of the state of Florida. Just because of that, the idea was, well, Russia presumably would stop being quite as aggressive. Why? Why would we think that? And yet that was the going wisdom in a lot of foreign policy circles. Other going wisdom in foreign policy circles, promoted by the likes of always wrong Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, is that if countries had McDonald's, they wouldn't fight each other. That trade ties would somehow, this is the converse of the economic sanctions argument, that trade ties would somehow prevent war from breaking out. That wasn't even true with World War I. The late 19th century, early 20th century was considered a period, the high watermark of global economic integration. And it ended in disaster with World War I. So it's always foolish, the notion that if you have countries that have allowed some semblance of capitalism to invade, that this would somehow bring countries closer together. Not necessarily. Other myths, that the UN is a useful institution. Now, everybody has known for decades that the UN is a completely useless institution. It was formed in the aftermath of World War II. There are countries that are on the Security Council that just should not be on the Security Council. The fact that the United States and the USSR were both on the Security Council immediately meant that the UN was going to be a useless and feckless organization. Today, you have Russia and China sitting on the Security Council. That means nothing is ever going to get done there. The idea of having a league of nations with nations that despise you and want to destroy you is completely stupid. The UN is not just stupid, it is counterproductive. It has been corrupt and venal, and the General Assembly has been largely evil for nearly all of its entire existence. So when you see our politicians jet-setting over to the UN in order to inform the nations of the world in highfalutin, high-blown speech that history will rebuke people like Vladimir Putin, yeah, the UN is a useless organization. We should level the building and salt the ground. Other ideas on foreign policy that have been proved wrong by Vladimir Putin here. And again, this doesn't mean that Vladimir Putin is right or good. Vladimir Putin is a thug dictator. He's been a thug dictator for a very, very long time. He is right now, I believe, the longest serving world leader on planet Earth. But other ideas that he has shattered here, because it turns out that hard-headed, brute military force shatters a lot of illusions, are that non-treaty promises by major nations are useful and trustworthy. They are not. Ukraine was promised security by the West. Nope. Hong Kong was promised security by the West. Nope. So if you're Taiwan, why would you believe any non-treaty promises by the West? Wouldn't you immediately be seeking to proliferate nuclear weapons? If you're a non-aligned country, or if you're a country that just does not have formal treaty obligations from the West, why would you not seek your own nuclear deterrent right now and build up your military right now? We're about to watch a nuclear arms race like we frankly have not seen in world history. Because if you are a nation that is threatened by China or threatened by Russia, Are you going to trust that the same West that turned over Hong Kong to the Chinese and turned over Afghanistan to the Taliban and turned over Ukraine to the Russians and watches as they fight alone, are you going to trust them? Again, that's not an argument for us intervening to put troops in Ukraine. It's an argument for why Ukraine never should have given up its nuclear weapons and why, if the West truly wanted to integrate Ukraine, it should have actually made treaty obligations to Ukraine, because that would have prevented Vladimir Putin from coming face to face with Kiev. Finally, the notion that international law exists at all has been disproved by Vladimir Putin, who has proved once again that international law, in the words of novelist Leon Uris, international law is something invoked by the evil to the detriment of the good. It's generally used by people who are bad in order to stop good people from fighting back. When good people invoke international law, the bad people don't give any craps at all. And that is the story of Vladimir Putin. So all of those ideas have now been shattered. And yet we live in a world of illusion. And in that world of illusion, pretty words spoken badly by the President of the United States make all of this go away. If we just say pretty things, if we Barack Obama this thing, then maybe the world will become a better place. And the hard power that Russia is now using to great effect in Ukraine to shell shock all of the NATO nations on its borders and to take over a fully fledged democracy in Ukraine that is basically on the border of being a first world country. The takeover of Ukraine, which is a war at the heart of Eastern Europe, that should have disillusioned a lot of these people, but it's not going to. It's not going to, because again, the experts remain the experts. As we have learned over the last couple of years, being wrong doesn't make you not an expert. It means that the public just doesn't understand you properly. The battle for the culture is heating up. We here at the Daily Wire are making some big moves. So be sure to like, subscribe, ring that bell, because you're not going to want to miss a single moment.